Picture this. It's a completely humid morning on August 3, 2016, at the Thiruvananthapuram International Airport in India. Passengers are slowly making their way across a jet bridge to board a 13-year-old Boeing 777-300. Now, this is one of the most well-traveled aircraft in the entire Emirates fleet. I mean, New York, London, Sydney, she has literally been everywhere. But today, this magnificent piece of engineering is unknowingly about to take her very last flight. So let's jump right into this explainer and unravel exactly what happened to Emirates Flight 521.
To really wrap our heads around the immense stakes here, we just need to think about one number: 300. We've got 300 souls on board, and they're all expecting a totally routine 3.5-hour trip to Dubai. Among them is Mohammed Qadir. He's a 62-year-old passenger sitting right there in seat 45B. And tucked in his shirt pocket, folded perfectly in half, is a Dubai duty-free lottery ticket. Now, spoiler alert, in just 6 days, those exact numbers are destined to win $1 million. But honestly, whether he'll even be alive to collect it is a completely different question, because a hidden trap is already being laid at their destination.
Okay, Section 1, Foreshadowing the Flaws. Before we even reach the skies over Dubai, we really need to look at the two men sitting in the cockpit. You see, they have never actually flown together before today. And without realizing it, they are hurtling toward this highly complex scenario that neither of them has ever trained for. The captain is 34, highly accomplished. He actually made captain a full decade earlier than most pilots. But here's the catch. In the past 12 months, out of 66 landings, only 9 were at his home airport of Dubai. Meanwhile, his first officer, a 37-year-old Australian, well, he has 29 Dubai landings in that exact same period. That's more than 3 times the captain's recent experience. And there's some really crucial baggage hidden in the captain's simulator training records. Evaluators had actually noted his tendency to flare, raising the nose for landing, a bit too early. But more importantly, they noted that under intense pressure, he suffered from severe tunnel vision. He would lock onto one single task and basically become blind to everything else.
Moving on to Section 2, the invisible trap.
So as Flight 521 approaches its destination, the environment itself is just turning completely hostile. It's setting up this deadly, totally invisible trap right over the runway. The ambient temperature in Dubai is a blistering 48 degrees Celsius. The runway surface baking at 67 degrees. Because of these insane extremes, air traffic control is issuing routine wind shear warnings all summer long. Now, the captain has heard these warnings 100 times, and 99 times out of 100, absolutely nothing comes of it. It just becomes background noise, right? But today is different. 2 immense low-pressure systems are choking off the normal sea breeze, and they're creating an invisible atmospheric boundary directly over runway 12 left. Inside that boundary is a tailwind, but the split second an airplane crosses it, it slams into a massive headwind. And that sudden, violent change in wind speed and direction, well, that is your textbook definition of wind shear.
To really grasp why wind shear is so incredibly dangerous, we have to separate ground speed from air speed. Think of it like this. Imagine a plane just parked on a runway with its engines completely off. Its ground speed is 0, obviously. Now blast a 10-knot wind directly at its nose. The plane still isn't moving an inch over the ground, but air is flowing over its wings at 10 knots. That means its airspeed is 10 knots. And here's the thing, a wing only cares about airspeed. More headwind means more air over the wing, which instantly creates this massive, unwanted spike in lift. A plane can literally drop or surge hundreds of feet in a matter of seconds when that airflow changes.
So you might be wondering, shouldn't the plane just warn them? And yes, the Boeing 777 has a predictive wind shear system. It works by bouncing radar pulses off moisture in the air to detect these exact threats. But here is the terrifying technological blind spot. Dubai is a desert. On a day this incredibly hot and dry, there is practically 0 moisture, no water droplets. There is absolutely nothing for those radar pulses to bounce off of. The system is completely blind, leaving the cockpit in a deadly false silence.
All right, Section 3, the final descent.
Completely oblivious to the invisible boundary waiting for them, Flight 521 begins its final descent into Dubai. And this happens amidst a massive cascade of hidden communication failures. Get this, there are 5 planes in the queue ahead of them. A Boeing 737 lands and radios a wind shear warning, but they do it on the tower frequency. Flight 521 is tuned to the approach frequency, so they never even hear it. Then, an Air India A321 tries to land, aborts, and executes a go-around. Minutes later, another Emirates 777 does the exact same thing. 2 go-arounds in 3 minutes. Yet neither crew tells the tower why they aborted, and incredibly, Dubai Tower fails to notify Flight 521 about these aborted landings at all. So our captain has half the picture, and it turns out to be the totally wrong half.
Coming over the runway threshold, the aircraft is getting pushed by a tailwind. At 40 feet above the ground, the captain initiates the flare to land. But remember his simulator baggage we talked about earlier? A standard flare should happen at 20 to 30 feet. He flares 10 feet too high. At 25 feet, the autothrottle computer assumes they're landing and pulls the engine power all the way back to idle. Now look at how these specific steps trap the plane. Rising columns of hot air, thermals, are pushing up against the wings. The early flare has decreased their descent rate. And finally, the air trap between those massive wings and the concrete creates a high-pressure cushion, which is known as ground effect. With idle engines, they are flying way too slow to climb, but generating way too much lift to actually land. They're trapped in this sort of zombie state, just floating feet above the runway, eating up concrete with every single passing second.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 20-second climax.
Floating just feet off the ground, 650 meters past the threshold, the aircraft finally crosses that invisible sea breeze boundary. The tailwind that was pushing them suddenly and violently transforms into an updraft and then a full-on headwind. Instantly, the airspeed jumps 12 knots in mere seconds. The wings just bite into that air, creating massive lift. The plane lurches upward. The captain, thinking he's just hitting some thermal updrafts, shoves the control column forward over and over, desperately fighting to force the nose down to the runway. But the plane just stubbornly refuses to respond.
Then a gust rolls the plane to the left. The captain corrects hard to the right, heavily banking the jet. Because of that severe bank, 1090 meters past the threshold, the right main landing gear briefly kisses the runway. The speed brakes automatically deploy to kill the lift, but the plane just bounces right back into the air. The gear is cycling like this, touching, lifting off, touching again. The automated cockpit voice abruptly calls out long landing, warning them they are way, way beyond the safe touchdown zone, so the captain makes the only logical choice left. He decides to go around and abort the landing.
And this right here, brilliantly but tragically, illustrates the intersection of human and machine error. To go around, the captain pushes the TOS/GOA, that's takeoff/go around, switches on the thrust levers, fully expecting the computer to automatically surge the engines to maximum power. But because the right gear had just kissed the runway for a fraction of a second, the plane's computer had switched from air mode to ground mode. This is a deliberate Boeing design meant to disable those TOS/GOA switches on the ground to prevent accidental takeoffs. So the switches do absolutely nothing. The thrust levers remain stuck at idle. And this is exactly where the captain's simulator baggage becomes a reality. Terrified of a catastrophic tail strike from pulling up too hard, he focuses entirely on the angle of the plane. Total tunnel vision sets in. All the warnings fade away, and he never even notices that right beneath his palm, the engines are producing zero thrust.
Because the captain still doesn't realize he's caught in a wind shear event, he calls for flaps 20, which is just a standard procedure for a normal go-around. The first officer complies. But in a wind shear escape maneuver, you are absolutely supposed to leave the flaps alone, because you desperately need every single ounce of lift those wings can generate. By retracting them, they are literally bleeding away the very lift they need to survive. The plane lifts off, but it isn't climbing on engine power. It is coasting upward purely on borrowed energy, trading its remaining speed for altitude. The first officer is busy looking inside the cockpit to adjust the altitude dial and completely misses the most critical number on the dashboard. The airspeed is at 135 knots and falling rapidly. At just 85 feet above the runway, that borrowed energy runs out completely. The vertical speed drops to zero, and then the 200-ton aircraft just begins to fall from the sky. Feeling that terrifying, weightless sinking in his stomach, the captain finally realizes the horrible truth. He physically shoves the thrust levers forward manually, all the way to the firewall. But physics is unforgiving. These massive Boeing 777 engines take about 6 full seconds to wake up from idle and reach maximum power. Based on their descent rate, the aircraft only has 3 seconds of altitude remaining. It is a completely unwinnable race between the engines spooling up and the concrete rushing up to meet them. 18 seconds after calling for the go-around, the tail of Emirates 521 slams into the runway at 124 knots. The right engine strikes the concrete, completely tears away from the wing, and immediately ignites the jet fuel. The massive aircraft slews sideways, grinding on its belly down the runway for a horrifying 800 meters before it finally comes to a halt.
Finally, Section 5, Aftermath and Lessons Learned.
Now the terrifying race for survival truly begins.
The aviation standard for a full aircraft evacuation is 90 seconds. But outside, extreme winds are blowing the inflatable escape slides flat against the fuselage, making a lot of them completely useless. Inside, chaos is just reigning. Panicked passengers actually stop to grab their luggage from the overhead bins, totally blocking the aisles while thick black smoke fills the cabin. So instead of 90 seconds, this harrowing evacuation takes 6 minutes and 40 seconds.
A massive 4-year investigation followed this, and it systematically patched the exact Swiss cheese holes that allowed this disaster to happen in the first place. Today, Dubai ATC is strictly mandated to pass on wind shear and go-around info to all incoming aircraft. Advanced wind sensors were physically installed all along the runways to totally defeat the blind spot of the onboard radar. Boeing updated its manuals to demand pilots explicitly verify thrust lever movement during a go-around, and Emirates hardwired this exact, terrifying ground mode scenario right into their recurring simulator training. Flight 521 remains the only hull loss in Emirates history, and actually, the route still flies today, though they did rename it to Flight 523.
Amidst all this destruction, there is a staggering thread of fortune. All 300 passengers and crew members who boarded that plane walked away from the wreckage. And remember Mohammed Khadra, the 62-year-old passenger with the lottery ticket in his pocket? He walked off that burning runway alive, and just 6 days later, his numbers actually hit. He became a millionaire.
But we really can't end this explainer without honoring the true cost of this accident. Exactly 9 minutes and 40 seconds after the plane came to a rest, the intense heat caused the center wing fuel tank to explode, blasting a car-sized panel of the wing high into the air. It struck Jassim al-Balushi, a heroic firefighter who had been standing right at his post, battling the blaze from the exact moment the aircraft stopped. The 300 people on board survived the invisible trap of Flight 521, but it really leaves us with a sobering final thought. The one man who ran toward the smoke when everyone else was running away was the only one who didn't get to go home. It really makes you wonder, what systems in our own highly complex lives are silently failing us, just waiting for the exact right conditions to become a trap? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.